Good afternoon. We have the topic on communication this afternoon. And just as we look at just some thoughts or questions, in particular, we're looking at communication in regards to husband and wife in the light of differences. So, with that in mind, I have a couple questions, and you don't have to raise your hands, okay? How many of you wish your spouse would be a little more like you? Or how many wish they'd be a little less complicated? Now you know why I said we're not raising hands. How many of you have been left scratching your head about something your spouse has said? You know, a husband says something, a wife says something, the others they're like, what does that mean? Or where's that coming from? Now you can raise your hands, okay? How many of you would say men and women are different? Unanimous. Surprising. Not really. Why are we different? Have you ever thought about that? We agree we're different. The question is, why are we different? And that is what we're going to try to answer today. And as we think of differences and their effects on communication. I have a quote here that's taken from the tech.org, Ask a Geneticist. And this is just a small segment pulled out of a larger article. And this is what they said. Now, if we look at the gene level instead of the base pair level, in other words, what they're doing is they're looking at base pairs, at genetic levels, and analyzing differences. What's the same as what is different? Men and women become much more similar. If we assume 30,000 total genes, then men and women are about 99.7% the same. Another way to think about this is the 55 million or so differences between men and women are all concentrated on one chromosome, X and Y, and 78 genes. Now notice, okay, they've narrowed it down to the base level. And they're saying there's 55 million or so differences. Okay, that's narrowed down. But yet we're 99.7% the same. But it comes down to one chromosome, X and Y, and 78 genes that comprise all those differences. And notice I said earlier, gender is absolute. It's so woven in our genetic DNA. Every cell contains, for a man or woman contains those two chromosomes. You know, those are present everywhere. And that's what defines male and female. Let's turn to Genesis chapter 1, 26. You don't have to turn to it. You can read it on the screen. I'll read it to you. Verse 26, Then God said, Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. Now flipping over to Genesis chapter 2. And the Lord God said, It is not good that man should be alone. I will make him a helper comparable to him. And the Lord God caused a deep sleep to fall on Adam, and he slept. And he took one of his ribs and closed up the flesh in its place. Then the rib which the Lord God had taken from man, he made into a woman, and he brought her to the man. And Adam said, This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, because she was taken out of man. Therefore a man shall leave his father and mother, and be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. Now, there's a couple thoughts or things I want you to remember. And as we go through the topic, we'll expand on it. Differences are an essential ingredient of functionality. They're necessary for advancement and growth. I wish I would have kept the article, but I had read an article by a secular writer, and he was bemoaning the current state of dialogue within the U.S. And he said this: one of the essential ingredients that is necessary for a culture to advance is the acceptance and embracing of diverse viewpoints. He said, in order for a culture to advance, you must have opposing viewpoints. Because viewpoint A checks the error in viewpoint B. Viewpoint B checks the error in viewpoint A. He said, for a culture to advance, there must be opposing dialogue and opposing viewpoints. If we silence and shut down a viewpoint, culture will not advance, it will collapse. Differences are essential, an essential ingredient of functionality. They're important. Secondly, we're all different, and it's a good thing. God created us different for a reason. He said creation was good. The physical and mental differences we encounter are not a product of the fall. They existed before the fall. How man was created, how God created woman, was pre-fall. I want us to think of that. And later, at the end, I'll wrap it up as to what is the difference, what is the issue. Thirdly is, communication is always a whole person response. And that includes the physical realm, how God created us. That includes the spiritual realm. Expecting our spouse to think, act, and respond like ourselves is an unrealistic and wrong expectation. Communication is an inseparable combination of our physical design and spiritual state. Our spiritual state improves or worsens our physical differences. The issue is not how we're designed. The issue is the state of our heart. And differences in design does not leave us with excuses. And we'll look in that as we go through this topic of actually bringing out observed and studied differences in creation of how man and woman are created differently. And I want to point out is how they affect our communication and how do we navigate through that. Let's look at differences. Notice when we look at physical characteristics, I want to emphasize is that we're discussing tendencies, not absolutes. There will be variation. But as a whole, studies have shown tendencies for men, tendencies for women. But as I said, there is variation. One is strength. Men as a whole tend to be 30 to 50% stronger than a woman. Now again, there's some variation there. I know some very strong women. That doesn't mean they're not women. It's just variation. And women tend to be weaker. And 1 Peter 3:7 would speak into that. That's referring to a woman as the weaker vessel. And as men, we're to keep that in account. Another difference is hormones. For a man, one of his dominant hormones is testosterone. And what is testosterone? It's a stimulant. It's an upper. For men, their testosterone tends to be 10 to 15 times higher. And testosterone is essential and is what makes men more muscular, gives them bigger bones, and more rugged features. It also will tend to make men more reactive, aggressive, and competitive. It causes hair growth and hair loss. And it's known, increase the testosterone in studies, it increases the aggressiveness of the person. Reduce it, It reduces the aggressiveness of the individual. It also would factor in, they believe, too, as to why they tend to be quicker to act and make decisions. For a woman, one of their dominant hormones is estrogen, and it is actually more of a sedative. And it's 8 to 10 times higher in a woman than a man. Men do have estrogen, but in significantly lower levels. What estrogen does with a woman is it tends to reduce reactiveness. It takes more stimulation to provoke a response. And again, this is what, as in a general observation across broader studies. It's not absolute. There's a lot of variation. They also believe that it does factor into some more of the maternal instinct that a woman has over a man. They tend to be more maternal, and studies have shown a woman will tend to be more quickly the one to die in attempting to save the life of a child. Another thing is brains. Men and women are created different just when you study the brain. For a man, he will tend to develop the left side of the brain quicker. That would be spatial skills. They also have a larger amygdala and preoptic areas. And what this is, just with the larger amygdala and the preoptic areas, this combined with testosterone may provide a biological basis for why men take more risk. They tend to bond less and are more prone to wandering. They also would have a smaller corpus callosum. And what is the corpus callosum? It is the nerve bundle connecting the brain hemispheres. A man will tend to use the left hemisphere of the brain more than the right. The smaller corpus callosum results in a more lateralized brain. Men think categorically. They're generally more single-minded, focused, less distractible, and possibly less socially aware. Wives, do you agree with that? You didn't have to raise your hands. Okay. Now notice, what I said early on is this is not an excuse. This is what has been studied over years, and this information has been accumulated of noticing as man grows in an understanding of how the brain functions, this is what they have observed. Men handle stress better, but this ability frequently leads to an early death. Men tend to be better at visual, spatial skills, and math. This includes, and what visual spatial skills are: foresight, problem solving, and coordination. Visual spatial skills are of great importance for success in solving many tasks in everyday life. For instance, using a map to guide you through an unfamiliar city. Okay, that requires visual spatial skills. Packing a box, putting something together, or turning a pile of lumber into a shed. That ability to just take things and make something. Now, I'm not saying women don't have it. What they're saying is men tend to be better at that, which would make sense because God created them for a specific role. They will tend to struggle more with multitasking, with communication, and with seeing the bigger picture, of beyond the focus at the moment. A woman will tend to develop the right side without this always, sometimes it's hard, I'm moving through stuff, it's hard for me to keep my slides up to date. But a woman will develop the right side of the brain, which is areas of communication, pronunciation, etc. They also will have a smaller amygdala and preoptic areas. The result of this is that a woman will tend to have a better memory, will experience more bonding, and be more maternal. But they also then have a significantly larger corpus callosum. That nerve bundle tying the two hemispheres of the brain together is significantly larger in a woman. which results in a woman will tend to use both hemispheres of the brain. They're not lateralized as much. They will use both sides. A larger corpus callosum enables the brain hemispheres to work more closely together. This means more and faster information transfer. It also means women are better at putting together what they're seeing, smelling, hearing, and remembering. This helps them develop a more complete understanding of a situation. A woman's take of a situation will typically be totally different than a man's take of the same situation. This improved putting together enables a woman to multitask and is believed to play a part in something we call women's intuition. I've been amazed at times where Vonna says, thus and thus. Is so-and-so getting sick? And I say, looks fine by me. They're standing, they're walking, they're living, look healthy. She says, I think they're getting sick. And I've been amazed how many times she was right. Within a day or so, the child was sick. I didn't see anything. She did. This means women are better communicators and have better memories. The downside is they can be more quickly distracted and are more susceptible to depression. Let's get into observation. How many of you ladies agree that men are more observant or less observant? Men are naturally less observant. It can be really frustrating. You know, Vonna says, go get the crackers or go get this. And I go and I look and I look and I look and I look. It's not there. And I say, well, where is it? She says, on the shelf right in front of you. And it's like, oh, I see. You know, she says, go get the crackers. There's Ritz crackers, there's Club crackers, there's Wheat Thins, there's Cheez-Its. The list goes on and on. And we're having soup. And of course, with soup, you use Ritz crackers. And I often think of, I'm looking for a particular thing. Perhaps the last time I saw it, it was the brown pack. Well, they ate all that pack and the box is there. Good luck finding it. It's not what I'm looking for. And there we see tunnel vision as can factor into that. Another thing within that, an observation is a man's smell, taste, and ability to see color variation usually is lacking. I wish that were all sometimes, but we'll just leave it at that. For a woman, they're naturally more observant. They can look in a cupboard and can tell you, at least I've noticed with Vonna, she can tell you a lot of what's there. Well, I know I saw it there. Did I have this? I don't know. If she says she had it, then we had it. A woman will process conversations, mannerisms, facial expressions, facial color, dress, hygiene, and many other clues to personality and temperament all at once. And then they'll say something doesn't feel right. Do you follow what I'm saying? What I'm saying is we're created different. These are differences. And these are differences at times that can be frustrating for us. Mentally and emotionally, they're different. So what do you think about this statement? We don't talk. Or the next one, are you wearing that today? I see different of you laughing. Have your wives said that to you, men? I can recall different times where I came out of the bedroom and Vonna says, are you wearing that today? And I've learned, no, I'm not. I mean, I'm not wearing this today. I was until that moment, and then immediately it changed. Oh yeah? How was that? Okay. I was trying to be gracious. And wives, you say that, and this is kind of the response. It's, why did he leave so fast? These are questions that come from how we're created differently. And then one more for the wives. A husband, as he enjoys his baked chicken, states, "Dear, you haven't made chicken corn noodle soup for a while." What do you hear in that one? Oh. There's a lot of variables. But within that, there's certain ways some of these statements tend to be taken.
You could say, oh, he's not satisfied with my cooking if you're in a bad day. Or you could say, he's giving me ideas what he wants to eat.
Depends how loving and gracious you are. We are mentally and emotionally different. And what I want us to look at as we look at this now is, I did not like the term of think differently, or we think differently, because we do not. Similar thinking with a different emphasis. In other words, a husband and wife, there are many ways what they think is different, but what they emphasize many times is, or what they think, how they think is the same, but what is emphasized is different. For a man, he tends to think analytically. And what is analytically? It's a manual process of drawing a conclusion by analyzing all the data, categories, facts, goals, and objectivity apart from emotions and relationships. It's what's necessary to build a building. It's what's necessary to do many things, but it tends to lack. A man will tend to think categorically. He organizes things, puts it together, puts it in categories, kind of lays it out. Here's where it is. Also will tend to think factually. If Vonda says to me, "We don't talk," what I have to do is say, okay, take a minute here, think. Because if I go fully by facts, I'm going to end up in the ditch somewhere. Factually tends to take statistics, history, numbers into account. It tends to look at face value. We don't talk. Well, that's funny. We're just talking. And we tend to say, okay, this is the problem of solving problems. Men tend to think objectively. What makes sense? Also, will tend to be more goal-oriented. What needs to be done and how to get it done. And this has happened different times. I'll say to Vonda, this computer's getting old. I need to think about replacing it. And so that starts a process for me. Here and there, it's kind of in the back of my mind. As I'm doing different stuff, I'll occasionally look at computers for sale, look at specs, and all the time the wheels are turning. And I'm sorting through it. And as this is happening, I'm kind of putting together what I want in the computer, and then I'll be observing, what does this generally cost? And one day, here's a computer with all that stuff on for a really good price. And I buy it. It's a good deal. And Rhonda says, we didn't talk about it. I didn't know you're buying a computer. Well, I told you we have to replace the computer sometime. But see, that's all happening internally. We tend, as men, will tend to think, and thinking analytically will include little emotional or relational context or expression. And within that, we have to remember too, desires or goals, the things that motivate us, will also be a part of that process. And that's where we have lots of work to do in making sure, as we desire to be a godly husband, to be a leader that pleases the Lord, to pull in and incorporate and work at involving our wife. For a woman. And then what happens, okay, just with this, the wife says we don't talk, and he's at a road he doesn't know which way to go. I mean, we got lots of ways to go. Where it ends, we don't know. At least, maybe it's just me. You know, there's a statement, I'm like, where's this coming from? Where's this going? What does this mean? I need to think this through here. I need to sort it out. I need to make sense of it. For a wife, she will tend, or woman will tend to think intuitively. And what is intuition? Intuition is a sense or conclusion drawn from the assembling of data, categories, facts, goals, and objectivity, and feelings without the manual process of analyzation. In other words, it kind of comes without analyzing. A man may arrive at the same place, but it's going to take him longer. He has to analyze it. Where woman kind of gets there, and then she can't tell you how she got there. It doesn't mean they're not accurate. It's just more so of, there's a lot of things happening. So in thinking intuitively, one of the things that we're going to say is this, okay, she also within is thinks observationally. She's observing. What is she seeing? Emotions, facial expressions, what you have on, what you're saying and doing. Men tend to be emotionally reserved and can be slow to respond. Not all, notice again, it's not absolute. These are tendencies. There's variation. And I've been amazed already at Vaughn and I are talking, and she'll say to me, "You're not listening to me." And I have to admit, right at that moment, mentally my mind slipped. I was looking at her, but I was departing. And she picked it up. And it wasn't long, it was just briefly. And she picked it up. And then I have to be humble and say, "I'm sorry, dear." Or I can say, "I was listening." And she'll say, "No, you weren't." I could tell. Notice that they are more observant. A woman within intuition, one of the things to recognize is it will tend to be more subjective. How they piece something together can be or lean more towards subjectivity, can tend to miss or de-emphasize facts. Within that is a lot of emotions. How is this making me feel? What is this saying about me? It can be more black and white and up and down. And within that can tend to be more of something that can feel like to a man as flip-flopping, where views change. And a lot of that can be factored into what is happening at the moment. A woman within thinking intuitively tend to be more relational and compassionate. And within that, it'll tend to be more personal. What does this say? They're thinking about me. or others? How will this affect those close to me? It can tend to be more present focused without future consideration because it's what is being felt, it's what's being observed, and it can tend to emphasize more the now. I'm not saying they don't think ahead, it's just more so this is tendencies. And obviously within that, we have to factor in desires and motivations. Remember, communication is a whole person response. You know, just with the whole thing of, you haven't made chicken corn noodle soup for a while. As the husband is eating that baked chicken. It would not be uncommon for a woman to say, "You didn't like my supper, did you?" Maybe none of you did that. That would not be uncommon. Now, it could be that the husband is looking, he says, there's a lot more chicken left over, and he's trying to be nice. You can make chicken corn noodle soup. I would have given this topic at a seminar in Kansas, and quite a number of the ladies said, "Didn't like my supper." And that would be common. That would not be uncommon. For a woman to interpret something like that as personally as they didn't like what I made. And for a man, it may have nothing to do with that. And some of this, the premises I'm coming from on this is that we're speaking to a husband and wife who are sincerely trying to love and serve one another. But how we think and process can create hurdles for us to get across, can complicate things. And so she says, "You didn't like my supper," and he's out of there, and then she's crying. Just these simple things like this, where a man perhaps is preoccupied with something. There's a problem he's trying to fix. And so that's kind of consuming his focus. And the wife senses this and feels there's something wrong. And she will tend to personalize it in the sense, it's something about me. When in reality, it may not be. And that's where it becomes so important that we communicate well. Men and women resolve problems differently. A man tends to need time to think through a problem before they can talk about it. The more personal and hurtful the situation, the more time it will take. He is trying to figure out what just happened. It takes time to sort out what he is thinking, to identify what he is feeling. He may be angry, deeply hurt, feeling misunderstood, and he doesn't want to say something wrong. In other words, something happens, and I think of this often. I'm trying to make sense of what is it? Okay, where am I in this? What was meant by this? And need to sort through it and kind of get things in order. And one of the things recently I thought about as well, if he talks about it, he wants help to sort it out personally and make sure he is thinking right. A wife's input will tend to be resolving it relationally between the other party. The husband's focus may be resolving it personally. When he resolves it personally, the relational dimension may be resolved as well. And I guess where this really struck me was, I have 5 boys, and I have accumulated over the years a lot of tools. And I want my boys to be able to use my tools. But I have one request or one requirement. Put it back where you got it. I worked in production my early years and worked in production for quite a few years before coming here. And so for me, organization was key. We had places for everything. And it was always to be kept there so that you can be the most efficient in producing what you're producing. And so to me it may take an extra minute to put a tool back, but then I know where the tool is. And if you're forgetful, that's really helpful too. So my boys use a tool. And it's convenient to let the tool where you used it. And so I go for a tool, or I walk in the shed in the barn, and there sits my battery charger. Right beside the four-wheeler it was used to charge. And it's left there for the next time we may need to use it. That's not where I keep it. Or I find this, or I find that. And I just started this all by looking for a screwdriver. And in the meantime, I find 5 other things that aren't put away, so I need to put those away. And I come up and I tell Vonda, I'm telling her how frustrating, and she says, you need to talk to him. I said, they know. I've told them how many times. They know what I want. I'm not going to keep nagging. But when I kind of get my own heart in order, it's okay. I have also resolved to what appeared to Von as a relational struggle between my son and myself. But really, for me, the focus was on my personal struggle with it, of making sure I'm in the place I need to be. Because a tool out of place means I have children. And that's a blessing, isn't it? I want them to be able to use those tools. But it is frustrating. I also want them to put them away. And that tension is where personally I have to sort it out. And when that's sorted out, the other's sorted out as well. It doesn't work that way for a woman. For a woman, they throw it all out there. It's kind of like, whoosh, here it is. And as they talk, they're sorting through it. Within this, there's going to be emotions and strong emotions. There may at times be very strong statements and seemingly disconnected or fragmentary processes or dialogue. In other words, there's pieces coming from everywhere. It's all coming together. Sometimes the current situation has little to do with the problem. How do we get there from here? I'm trying to follow this. It may have several problems woven together. And it will be distinctly personal. The worst thing you can do is say, here's how to fix it. But as she's talking, she's sorting through it. And again, there is variation. Also, men and women communicate differently. A man tends to be condensed, objective, and to the point. I just was reminded of this again. Braden was at Bible school, and Vonda asked him how it's going. Good. What did you do today? Took a nap, played volleyball. And Vonda and Haley are both over in the kitchen getting noisy about this. Doesn't tell them anything. They said all they needed to say. What more was there to say? It was condensed, objective, and to the point. And we also, we talked about at different times when, when Dustin was dating, when Caitlin was dating. Dustin would be in PA for the weekend. He'd come home. Vaughn would ask him, how's the weekend? How was your weekend? Good. It would drive her crazy. How do I know it's going good? And when Caitlin was, they'd talk for hours about the weekend. And that was so comforting. Men can have deep discussions. I enjoy theology. A farmer likes to talk about the cows, but they all will tend to lack relationally. For a woman, it tends to be more personal or intuitive. A woman will tend to question motives more. You are doing this because. You know, eating chicken. The husband says, oh, this is good. I love baked chicken. One of my favorites is baked chicken. Yeah, I like the skin. I know, according to some, that would not be good for you, but I figure if it takes a year off my life, at least I enjoyed living. And he happens to think about chicken corn noodle soup because he noticed there's going to be a lot of chicken left over, but not enough for another meal, but enough for chicken corn noodle soup. And he says, yeah, it makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? Von always likes suggestions. Oh, you haven't made chicken corn noodle soup for a while. You don't like my supper? It'll tend to be more personal. Again, I want to emphasize this is not absolute. There's a lot of variation. A woman can tend, and this is not just women, men will do it as well, but tend to communicate more indirectly. Are you wearing that today? What is Vonda saying to me when she says that? The colors don't match. You're not going away looking like that. But that's not what she said. Okay. They can tend to communicate more indirectly, can tend to be more subjective, and it may lack facts or objectivity. Just tell them, hey, Dave, that doesn't match. Oh, okay, I can understand that. It doesn't match. And when communication or things like that are vague, it can be difficult for a man to understand what is being said, what is being meant. Because it's not, is it fact, is it objective, what is being meant by it? It can be interpreted by fact. She doesn't like, we don't talk. That's how I would tend to take it. We don't talk. What do you mean? We just were talking for 15 minutes. We just talked for a while yesterday. We don't talk. Okay, statements like that can be interpreted factually, but we have to think it's coming from a different angle. We need to think beyond the box of how we tend to think. We don't talk may mean I don't feel close to you. It may mean something you did is bothering me. Or it may mean you're not paying as much attention or affection to me as you have been. Or recently, Vonda mentioned that, and I asked her a little bit to explain a little bit what she means. She says, we were sitting here for 15 minutes and I didn't have anything to say. And I was like, whew. It just isn't me that time. But just that part of relationship and being relational. Also differences spiritually, and I'm not going to spend much time on this, but I want this just to be here as to these are differences. Ben will get into that more. But we can be different spiritually in beliefs, convictions, and intensity of convictions. One of the things I want to say with this is many times foundational beliefs are the same, but the difference is in the application or the intensity of the conviction. And if we are able to evaluate it, many times we can kind of, as we sort through it, it's like, yeah, that makes sense. We believe the same. But there's subtle differences. There can be differences in training and applications and traditions that we have to sort through. Also, differences in goals and desires. A different human being. Moving into communicating well, Philippians 2, chapter 3 says, or chapter 2, verse 3 says this: let nothing be done through selfish ambition or conceit, but in lowliness of mind, let each esteem each other's better than himself. Let each of you look out not only for his own interests, but also for the interests of others. Let this mind be in you, which also was in Christ Jesus, who being in the form of God, did not consider it robbery to be equal with God, but made himself of no reputation, taking the form of a bondservant and coming in the likeness of men. Foundational a foundational text when we think of communicating well. This is all about communication, even though it doesn't mention communication. But yet it is. Another, Philippians chapter 4, verses 4 through 6 and 8 through 9. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say, rejoice. Let your gentleness be known to all men. The Lord is at hand. Be anxious for nothing, but in everything, by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. Verse 8. Finally, brethren, whatever things are true, whatever things are noble, whatever things are just, whatever things are pure, whatever things are lovely, whatever things are of good report, if there is any virtue or if there is anything praiseworthy, meditate on these things. The things which you have learned and received and heard and saw in me, these do, and the God of peace will be with you. Many times, our differences are not biblical issues. Many times they're not. Many times, if we're able to separate biblical doctrines from applications, preference, or opinion, we'll find out that we believe at a core level the same thing, but we apply it differently, or we prefer it to have a different preference or an opinion. It's not a difference in doctrine. An application is not the doctrine. It is something drawn off the doctrine. At the same time, you cannot have a doctrine without an application. They're inseparable. But yet we have to recognize there are two things, two different things. And if we're unable to make that distinction, we will run into a lot of trouble. Because we'll say we don't believe the same, and it goes off the rails big time then. Because both may believe in the doctrine of nonconformity, but they have a different application. And if the application is said to be the doctrine, then you're going to have trouble, because you can't meet, because it's not the doctrine. What is communication? There's several elements. One is words. Secondly is tone of voice. And thirdly is body language. This is the whole of communication. All these three make up communication. And so as we talk about communicating, I'm going to talk about these three. It's the package. Secondly is the communication triangle. Ultimately, first and foremost, within communication is God. He is in everything. He is in all of communication. Then within this is myself, you, and then your spouse. This makes up the 3 points of communication. And communication between myself and God directly will be reflected in the communication between myself and my spouse. If God is the center of my focus and I'm seeking to live for Him, it will be reflected in how I communicate to my spouse. If our communication is bad, is evil, then we have to say, wait a minute, something's wrong with my relationship with God. They are inseparable. There's something I'm holding above God, and it's reflected in how I communicate to my spouse. Secondly is listen to your spouse. And by the way, men, listening behind a newspaper is not listening. And so I just wanted to get that out of the way first. We're Xing that one out. That one is not listening. So just some things that hinder listening. Busyness. It can be others, self, or life-imposed. We've come through a very busy stretch here at Deeper Life the last 14 months with renovation. Sometimes it seemed like everything was happening all at once. And it couldn't wait till tomorrow. It had to be done. Busyness. And within this busyness is when we have to be especially proactive to make sure time is set apart for each other. Because when things are busy, the pressure is on. We tend to not do that. Sometimes the self-imposed busyness has to do with the lack of planning, being undisciplined, or lacking willingness, or too much of a willingness to serve. Sometimes it's simply life-imposed. I mean, we tried to be practical, tried to be wise in it, but it all came together at once. Kind of what we found here. If a group calls and wants to come for a work project, and they say it works here, on this date is what works best for them, it's, okay, you know what? We got to make this work. Whether it was the best date or not, we need to make this work. That's life imposed sometimes. Also within that is selfishness. When life is about me, these are things that hinder my ability to listen. When it's I am the one that is hurt, I am the one that has been sinned against the greatest. Also, the greater my selfishness, the more angry I'll be. A selfish person will be an angry person. There's factors coming together. There's various ways anger can be expressed. Also within this is unresolved issues. Can be a failure to compromise on another issue. It can be a failure to pursue. If I notice something's bothering Vaughn, it's evident, and I don't do anything about it. That's an unresolved issue that's going to complicate and make it difficult for her to hear. Or if there's something bothering me and I'm not honest about it, it's going to make it difficult for each to listen. Attitudes. How you feel or think about your spouse, especially their concerns, tendencies, or weaknesses. It's just men. Or it's just women. It's just how they are. Okay, that's an attitude. And that's problematic. It's true men and women are different. And it's true, these various things are true, but we cannot allow it to become an attitude because that will interfere with the ability to hear. Also, assumptions. An assumption is a conclusion that is not supported by the facts. That is an assumption. Now, sometimes we can assume and later the facts support it. But more times than not, an assumption is an assumption. It is not supported by the facts, and it can create a lot of problems. Assumptions hinder our ability to listen. They're just being miserable and contrary. That's an assumption. Maybe they are, maybe they're not. What are the facts to support it? When I go to look for a pack of crackers in the cupboard and I can't find it, I'm not being miserable and contrary. I'm trying to find the crackers. And I'm just not seeing them. And sometimes we can interpret that as say, just being ornery again. We have to be alert and recognize that assumptions hinder listening. Defensiveness. Defensiveness is attacking the other in defense of myself. Defensiveness is saying, I am more important than you. Go back to Philippians chapter 2. Let this mind be in you. What mind? Essentially, we see in Philippians 2 the golden rule is there as well. Treat others as you want to be treated. Think of the other more highly than yourself. What they want is more important than myself. Defensiveness is not doing that. Defensiveness is the unwillingness to consider I might be wrong, or it can be unforgiveness. I'm going to even the score. Communicating well. Listen to your spouse and how to listen. Look at them and pay attention. Look at them. Focus and bring your mind into focus on the other and focus on what they're saying. Don't try to come up with an answer before you need to. Listen, pay attention, focus on them. Listening includes the eyes and the mind. Secondly, is give them time to speak. We need to allow them the time to clarify things, to sort through things. Because I know different times in conversations, Vonna will say, I'm not sure. I'm not sure how to word this, or I'm not sure. I'm trying to make sense of this. Give them time to do that. Thirdly is listen to the body language. What's their body saying? What's their face saying? Facial expressions. Observe. Pay close attention. It'll tell you things. Many times within a relationship, at least I've noticed, is I'll observe with Vonna something is wrong. It's not in what she said, but I can just tell it. Sometimes. Next time. Anyway, it's kind of like the crackers. But it's the whole process of trying. And that's where attitudes become so important. Are they trying? It's important to believe, yes, they are trying. Confirm what they are saying. Am I understanding this correctly? Are you saying this? I'm not sure how many times I've said that, and Vonna said, no, I'm trying to say this. Or that's not it. And we can keep communicating. Put conclusions in question form. In other words, are you saying this? Or is there something else? Or I understand, according to my understanding, is this what you are meaning? Listen to what you are saying. Listen to yourself. What are you saying? How are you saying it? I'm not mad. How many people here would say I'm mad? Only a few. Hey, the rest of you pay attention. I'm not mad. Okay. Watch, observe yourself. Treat them respectfully. Okay, I'm trying to set a point. Okay, big letters, the bigger the letter, the louder they're yelling, okay? That's at least in the tech world today. Treat the other respectfully. They're a human being with feelings, with desires, with goals. Be respectful. Talk about your differences. What do you agree on? Notice I'm starting with, what do we agree on? It's important to identify, what do I agree on? And list those things out. Here is what we agree on. Now, second is, what do you disagree on? What is the disagreement about? And it can be a number of things. It can be misunderstandings, or it can be simply personality, where the differences in personality tend to lead us to a different conclusion on a situation. It can be likes or dislikes, beliefs. It can be family traditions. Methods or differences in methods of discipline or opinion. Those can be the differences where we agree on, okay, consequences are necessary and are important, but we differ on what the consequence should be. Okay, what do we agree on? The importance of consequences. What do we disagree on? What the consequence should be. That's solvable. That can be compromised. Avoid. Okay, make sure you're running from these. Avoid making it personal. It's not about me. Notice that in Philippians 2, Jesus could have claimed something, but he said no. He became a servant. It's not about me. It's not about who I am. It's about what God wants. Avoid being defensive. Here, ask questions. Defensiveness and it being about me is all in the same thing. It's together. Do not threaten or attack. Here, just hear them out. And avoid bringing in past differences. It only confuses it. Reaching a compromise. Be calm and respectful. Okay, take a deep breath. Be calm. and talk about it. Make sure you stick to the subject. We're talking about what should be done to Johnny. Johnny did this, this, and this. We agree that consequences are needed. Mom thinks, or dad thinks he should be grounded for a year or a lifetime. And mom says, no, just miss this and this. Stick to the subject. Don't talk about Sally. Stick to the subject. Or don't talk about yesterday this happened. No, stick to the subject. Make sure the discussion is private and allows plenty of time. The greater the disagreement, the more time it will take to sort through it. Take your time. Don't rush it. Take your time. Write things out if needed. Personally, write it out. Here's where I am. It can help clarify things. Ask yourself, what does Jesus want me to do? Okay, God, what do you want me to do in this situation? And lastly, seek counsel if you're unable to come to an agreement. In closing, we are different by design. God intentionally made us this way. These differences are not a result of the fall. These differences are essential and enable us to fill our roles in His creation. What the fall changed was our spiritual state, which then changed how we relate to and respond to these God-designed differences. Ultimate beauty is in the blending of many differences, into one functioning unit. Husband and wife, you need each other. God has designed you as a husband to fill a role. He has designed a wife to fill her role. And this argument is not that we're incomplete without the other. No, we're talking about a specific rule within His creation, and that is a home. And especially the training of children. This perspective that each brings to the marriage creates a fullness. It creates differing viewpoints which bring balance, which bring growth, and bring unity. And ultimately, that unity glorifies God in a way that nothing else can. Remember, you need each other. Don't get lost in how we are created differently. But look beyond that. Try to understand the other and live from that knowledge. God bless.